Hopefully this works.
Is that 3D?
Huh?
Like I want some 3D glasses.
Okay. Thanks everybody for coming. I am going over some things that I learned at React Rally. Want to give a shout out to Tecuity for sending me to React Rally. It's a conference that's down in Salt Lake that happens every year, and there's a lot of industry leaders using React at different companies. So there are a lot of great talks, and I thought about doing, when I was preparing this, about just doing kind of a general summary, but I figured that wouldn't actually be all that helpful for everybody. So I've decided to pick two of the talks that I think were most impactful for the work that we do here. And I'm just going to try to go a little more in depth into those. And hopefully this works. I have like a presenter mode that apparently is not working. So give me 1 second. There we go. Okay. So the first talk I wanted to talk about is from a woman named Nicole Sullivan. So she is the product manager at Google, and she is the product manager over the Chrome team. So she headlined this conference, and she was talking a lot about how the Chrome team is working with frameworks like React in order to make the web better. She first started out talking about how front-end frameworks like React, Angular, and Vue have become essentially de facto standards for the web. They're used by millions and millions of websites, including all the largest websites out there. And originally, the Chrome team had been working on a competing framework called, I think it was called like the native framework. And it was meant to solve a lot of the problems that React and Angular and things like that already solve. And they realized after a while that there was no need for them to compete with the existing frameworks. So instead, they dropped all their work on the native framework. And instead, they've decided to work directly with, especially the React team, to implement some of the things that the React team wants to see in the web to make the frameworks better. So they've actually been meeting weekly with the React team in sort of like a Scrum sort of scenario where the React team gives feedback on new Chrome features and requests things that will make the frameworks better. And so some of the biggest problems facing frameworks today are things like scheduling and prioritization. I don't know if anybody who uses React followed the React Fiber architecture and the creation of that. But the idea was to make it so that React was a little bit faster, so that things like user inputs took a higher priority over lower priority work that the browser has to do. And just to give you an idea of what that looks like, this man named Dan Adamrov, he works for the React team, and this was him at JSConf in Iceland in 2018. I'm just going to play a short clip of this, and hopefully the sound works.
This is my demo. Maybe it doesn't look like a real app that you built, but at least it's pretty beautiful, and it's graphic, so it's easy to see from the audience. But what I have here is I have a text box. I can type into the text box. Hello, JSConf. And I have a bunch of charts. And every time I type, the charts update. And I made it so that the longer I type, the more complicated the charts become. So this lets me show that no matter how fast the implementation of component is, eventually, if the component tree is deep enough and there are enough DOM nodes, there is enough computation, it's going to slow down. And I don't mean to nitpick on a specific chart example. You can imagine that instead of a chart, there could be any kind of React component tree. So the main point is just that it's a heavy tree with a lot of DOM nodes, a lot of components, and it updates every time I type. And so already with this level of complexity, when I type, I experience stutter. And I'm the one who experiences it. Maybe you don't see it. So I built a small clock. So the clock shows how the screen updates. So when the clock is green, it means that the last frames were drawn pretty near to each other, so it feels responsive. But if you see when I type, I can see yellow and even red. This means that it takes a lot of time between different frames, so the user experience suffers.
And he goes on and talks about what React is trying to do to solve this problem. And I know I've seen this in my own work working on the front end for the different states, where sometimes when you have extra long tables or a lot of big data structures, that the user experience can suffer. It can get kind of laggy and slow. And there's things that we can do to optimize that. But Chrome has realized that this is a problem as well. And so they're working with the React team to fix this. So just to kind of recap how this works. So browsers traditionally are single-threaded. Every tab that you have open, there's a lot of things that the browser needs to do. It needs to, parse your JavaScript and run animations. It needs to do async operations like fetching from a database, and then it needs to parse all those things and paint them out to the DOM. There's a lot of operations that your browser needs to do to make a rich application work. And the problem right now is that because browsers are single-threaded, that all of those different processes have to fight for the main thread. That means if something takes a higher priority, it has to wait for anything else that's going on before it can finish. So I put together just kind of a simple animation to try to give you an idea of what this looks like. So you can imagine this as being like a typical sort of instant search box, whereas you start typing, this search box is going to go look up on a database and find some results for you. So as the user types, this is a representation of the thread in your browser. So it comes in first, and hopefully you can read this, but it comes in, and as soon as you type, that becomes the first work that gets added into the call stack here, where it's going to add that letter into your input over here. But then it has a whole bunch of other stuff that it's got to do. It's got to call out to your database. It's got to receive your results, and it might show a loader while it's waiting. And then when it comes back, it needs to parse your results and then paint them out to the DOM. And this takes actually like a fair amount of time. And especially if you have like kind of a complex, rich search going on, this can feel pretty laggy. As the user types, each time that the user types, it has to wait for all the other things to finish before that new letter can get added in to the DOM. And a lot of cases you may not notice this if you're on a fast computer, but especially when somebody's maybe using like Internet Explorer or a lower powered computer or phone, this kind of experience can become really apparent where, kind of like that demo showed, it gets very laggy very quickly. What we really want is we want a call stack that looks a little bit more like this. So it doesn't matter when the user types, that becomes the most high priority work that the browser does. And even though this other stuff is going on, it can just interrupt the other things that are going on. And the things that are important to make the user feel like it's working really smooth, those take higher priority. So the Chrome team is working on a set of APIs that make this possible, and they're being referred to right now as the scheduler. The documentation on it is a little bit spotty right now because it's still in development, but it should be coming out soon. But the general idea right now is that you'll be able to have an API with the browser to set low, medium, and high priority work for the browser to do. The especially nice thing about this is because they're working directly with the frameworks, a lot of this is going to get built into the frameworks themselves. So things like inputs in React will automatically be considered a more high priority bit of work. So you don't really need to change anything. As soon as Chrome and React update, and we pull in those updates into our projects, users using Chrome and Edge now, because it's Chromium, will just automatically see that things are a little bit smoother and faster. And then we also will have access to these APIs just natively in the browser if we want to decide ourselves how to prioritize the work. So I thought this was really impactful. I'll send out some links that talk a little bit more about the scheduler if you're interested in it. But yeah, that was the first talk I wanted to talk about. And the second one, I'm going to completely butcher this man's name, so I apologize to him in advance, but I think it's Mihai Cernuska. And he works in New York. He's a freelance digital product designer and developer. And I actually had a chance to talk with him for like a good half an hour or so after his presentation. And this was probably my favorite talk of the whole thing. And he started it out, he worked on this project called America Off Balance. And I'll just quickly show you what this is. So he worked with a bunch of artists at another company to build this kind of interactive storytelling thing that talks about the national debt. And you can see, you've probably seen websites like this where it's this very rich interactive experience. As the user scrolls down, the page is really updating a lot. You get these really smooth animations, this sort of thing. So I won't go this whole thing, and I'll send out a link to this as well if you want to look at this page. But his talk, a lot of it was about how he built this experience and the different techniques that he used. So let me switch back over here. I wanted to point out too, I don't know if you saw this as I was scrolling down, but I just thought this was one of the most impressive little bits of web animation I've seen, where you can see he's created these chamfered edges, this sphere and this rectangle that come together. And that's something that would normally be very difficult to do on the web, and he talks in his talk about how he accomplished this kind of geometry. I'm not talking about that today because it's not very applicable to us, but I'll send out the link to his talk. And if you're interested in this, I'd encourage you to watch it because the math behind it is really fascinating. But what I wanted to talk about is all these tips and tricks that he talked about for this kind of interactive storytelling, which commonly, if you were to Google it, is referred to as scrollytelling. And two of the main techniques that you can use for these kind of experiences is intersection observers and scroll event listeners. And so I was really inspired by this talk. Like I said, it was my favorite talk at the conference, and so I went back and tried some of these techniques. And I came up, if you're familiar with the new React, I came up with my own hook called use page progress. And it's not very big. This is actually all the code for this hook. But what it does is you can import this hook, and it will report to you how far the user has scrolled down their page. It gives you a value from 0 to 1 that you can use as a percentage. And so I wanted to show you kind of this demo that I put together. So this is just kind of something that you could build very quickly with this kind of hook. And so you can see it's reacting to my scroll. I can stop, it's interruptible. And this really is not very much code. To give you, I've built this debug view so you can kind of see what's going on here. So there's separate layers for each of these circles. And as I scroll, each of those circles has its own progress from 0 to 100. And they're remapped from the overall page progress so that as you scroll, you can use that progress per layer to then update all the other stuff on the page. And obviously, we're not typically building those kinds of big scrolling experiences, but I think this is very applicable to work that we do as well. I think I've posted this out in Slack before, but this is a project I've worked on occasionally when I have just a little bit of extra time, which isn't that often. But I've called it River Guide, and this takes in the JSON that our typical wizards output, and I've tried to create this kind of alternative user interface just as an experiment in what the future of our forms could look like. So you can see here this uses actually a lot of the same techniques. So this takes an entire form and spreads it out on an entire page. And then as you scroll, it's just updating over here. It's keeping track of your progress through the page and then updating where you are. It also gives you kind of this mini bar down here that you could scrub through. And even, as an example, let's say you got an error in your form. I have a couple errors here. It's going to give you in this mini map where you are in this form where these errors are, so you could always scrub back and find what's gone wrong. And this is kind of experimental and just an idea of what you can do with this. But there's a lot of things that I think are applicable with these techniques that we could apply to our own work on the web. So let me swap back here. And so he ends off his talk talking about something that I thought was really interesting about building your own tools for the web. And I just wanted to play a clip of his talk.
Strategy for dealing with some of his complexity. So I'm going to call it visual scaffolding tools. And they have a few properties. They have to be cheap and modular, and they have to be temporary. And the first two, we got a big architectural boost recently with React and hooks. And I think Zach's kind of tweet really captures kind of what I felt about it when I sort of moved and started exploring. And like what it did to me, it just made everything cheaper and more modular. And by extension, it enables building more more specific kind of tools, that are not a huge investment. And the temporary one requires a shift in mindset, because as people who work on products, we're like really bad at like throwing stuff away or like building something that we're only going to use once. We like try to like finesse and maintain things. So I have a rule for you. So if the last 10% is 90% of the work, let's shoot for a solid 85, because that's going to give us the best bang for the buck. So I tried to apply this. I wanted to give you like an actual example of what this would look like. So I had a problem. I had to build this slide deck. I knew the kind of examples I wanted to show you, but I also knew from the experience of building a graph balance that it's going to be just a giant slog of, it's going to be really hard to change if I want to change anything. So I ended up building a tool, and the tool itself is a React component, of course, and it's organized around chapters, and each chapter has a space, and each space is a view, and it has a bunch of layers, and each layer is a React component. That's not particularly interesting, but when you hit enter, you go into edit mode, and you do a plus, and you get the list of layers. So now, for each keyframe, I can add a layer to it and basically place it, right? So let's say we want to have this image in the middle. And now, when I flip between the different views, it kind of, if it finds the layer in the same, if it finds the same layer twice, it basically does a transition, right? I just noticed that the transition is a bit funny here, because the green kind of goes away immediately, so just fix that real quick. Send that to the back. Much better. So what I found interesting about building this is it not only changed how I build it, it not just made it faster. Having this tool changed what I built. It made it really possible to play around and like really experiment and discover this new medium I had created for myself. So the tools we use day to day directly influence like what you're going to end up building and how you think about what you're building. So they become really important. And just looking generically at, even if none of these lessons apply to your day-to-day work, I think it's really important that, faced with growing complexity, that we look at ways to, and we feel empowered to look for ways to change how we work and look for opportunities. And then I hope you'll share it back with everybody. Thank you so much. There's a link.
So I really like this idea that he talks about it a little more in depth in his talk, but I like this idea of building our own tools to create new mediums for ourselves to do our work. I especially like this idea that these should be, kind of cheap, modular, and temporary tools. He has this quote there that I really like, that tools and the kind of tools you use as designers, as developers, and as product owners make a big impact on the kind of challenges you can take on. And I think that's really true, that our work is only as good as the tools that we have to create our products. And so I was thinking about, I feel like we've all kind of done this, but maybe more subconsciously, where we build our own little tools to accomplish things in our work. And I was thinking about some stuff that I've built before, and in showing you this list, I mean, none of these, this isn't to like be impressive or anything. These are just like some random little tools that I've created over the years that I've worked here to accomplish my work. Stuff like, we have like an SVG icon library, so I created a little script that takes an SVG and converts it into a React component, and that sort of thing. Or like some stuff we're working with the wizards, or like the sandbox that I have embedded on our website just for development that helps you like build components in isolation. That kind of like random thing. And I feel like we've all done this. We've all built little tools on our own. And the key thing I think is that these need to be cheap, modular, and temporary. So none of those tools that I built are like all that cool, or like they're not things that I've open sourced and that work in general ways for a lot of different companies. Like they're very specific to the work that I'm doing. And so I like what he's talking here about not overthinking every solution. That we, especially as developers, we frequently are trying to think in like big abstract ways, and how can we solve a problem in like a really abstracted way, and we end up with these very large kind of framework things that we built. I mean, there's jokes, especially in the JavaScript community, about how every day there's like 10 new frameworks that come out because everybody's trying to solve problems in big abstract ways. And that's good, and we want to continue to do that for a lot of things. But a lot of times we just have little problems that we want to solve, and we can just build our own quick tools that aren't big abstract things that we build, but are just very specific and work really well for the few things that we need to do. So I have a challenge for everybody, and that's to do this, to look at a process that you're involved in, because not everybody here is a developer. There's a lot of other things that we do, and people might be involved in design or communications, testing, development, all these different things. But regardless of where you're working, I think we can all take this advice for ourselves. So I have a challenge to look at the work that you're doing and figure out a quick tool that you could build for yourself that improves your work. I mean, it could be as simple as like an Excel sheet that makes something a little quicker for you, or a little script that solves some problem, or maybe you work with a specific program and you can build your own template. So I'd encourage you to try to identify something that you could build for yourself. And then if you come up with something that you're proud of, share it out on Slack so that everybody can get ideas and maybe use your tool. So thanks everybody for coming. That's all I have for this Lunch and Learn. We still want to do more of these, so please, if you have ideas for something you want to share in a Lunch and Learn, it can be about anything, please Slack me, talk to me, let me know. Jake.
What's your opinion on websites you go to and you start scrolling down and there's an image in the back that stays still? No, how does it work? It's really weird. It's like...
Or like parallax stuff?
Yeah, and it makes me immediately leave the website. What is your opinion?
Well, there's actually like kind of an interesting new feature coming to, I think it's already in Safari, and Chrome is adding it soon, called, it's like preferred reduced motion, and it's a CSS attribute that the user can actually, like in their software, like if they're on a Mac or something, they can, in their settings, say they prefer reduced motion. And then you can disable that kind of thing just across the web.
Like you're reading, and then you're scrolling, and somehow you're looking at an image, and you don't know how far you're going to have to scroll. You know what I'm talking about, though?
Yeah. And that is something to bring up. I mean, if you're doing like these kind of scrolling experiences, you want to be careful in what you do, because especially for like accessibility stuff, like you don't want the page to be moving all around in ways that make it difficult to use. So like go kind of light on using those. But yeah, there's new features coming that actually make that easier to like have motion for people that want motion, and then people for accessibility reasons, if they want to disable it, they can do that. Right. Yeah, any other questions? Yeah.
Yes, with the first example of the facts we insert, it's not just that you want to prioritize the search for CAT over the C search.
Right.
You actually want to cancel the C search, right?
Yeah.
So are they talking about prioritization? Basically saying, I don't need to finish that process anymore as well.
Yeah, and that's some stuff that you kind of can already do. You can cancel a fetch request and things like that. But it is like a little bit difficult to set up to do that. But there's still other stuff that, even just like if you're painting like a loading animation to the page, and then the results need to update, just things like that, just where you're touching the DOM and have to make updates. That takes up the main thread, and the user can't type during any of that work. And this would let you skip that, so that you could pause all the rendering and render something else.
I relate to it because my dog does that to the whole computer.
Yeah.
I hate it when it loses prioritization on the keyboard, so I certainly notice it when I experience it on the web.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of been like one of the big problems that a lot of browsers are trying to solve. And, yeah.
Speaking of a lot of browsers, do you know if like Firefox or...
So yeah, I've looked into that. I think Firefox hasn't given any public signals about whether or not they're going to include a scheduler. I mean, luckily Chrome is the most used browser, and now Edge uses the Chromium engine, and so both Edge and Chrome will get both of those features. I imagine though, if this becomes something that a lot of people are using, that Firefox would end up building it, and maybe Safari. I don't know. They never do much, but yeah. Any other questions? And I'm happy to talk to any of you guys about this later and about how I built any of the stuff on here. But I'll post out links so you guys can take a look at this. So yeah, thanks for coming.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Please get so much, Chris.
Yes, thanks.